Alrighty, welcome back to Shut Up and Ball. I am Aaron Chow, accompanied by my co-host John Harris, as always, and we are back to react to Week 8 of the NFL. Every game, and also every team, because every team played, no buys this week. So yeah, crazy weekend, and trade deadline occurred as of today. We'll mention some of the moves. There wasn't any like absolutely earth-shattering trades. A few good ones. That could obviously impact the title race down the line. Like I said, we'll mention it as we go along. But let's start with Thursday night, as always. But was the Buffalo Bills taking care of business, beating the Tampa Bay Buccaneers 24-18? What were your thoughts here in regards to the Thursday night game, John?
Not surprising. I think it kind of went as both of us expected. Buffalo wins, but maybe not quite convincingly enough that they were able to cover, and that's what happened. The score wasn't actually as close as it seems. Like Tampa rallied late and got that touchdown, went for two, got it, and then tried to make this comeback. But realistically, Buffalo was largely in control during the second half. The first half, it was relatively close. Tampa played a good game overall. I'd say they played a good game. But yeah, quite simply, it just came down to they can't really run the ball that well, so they weren't able to move it that efficiently. And on the other side, they weren't really able to stop the key playmakers that Buffalo has. Kincaid has a good game. Gabe Davis has a good game. Some of the other guys stepped up too, like Khalil Shakir. So yeah, kind of went as expected. Good win for Buffalo. I wouldn't say this is a bad loss for Tampa. You're 3-4 going into the midpoint of the season, and they still got some things that they could look to improve upon. I was a little bit surprised. I thought that maybe they, I know we're not talking about the trade deadline, but maybe they'd be a little bit more active in terms of shoring up the offensive line, because I do think that that's kind of the biggest weakness on this offense. But it's all right. It is what it is.
Yeah, and maybe, just with this, it seemed like there's only one offensive lineman moved is like Ezra Cleveland. Yeah. And even then, it was like a swap too. I think, if I remember correctly, Jacksonville sent some guy back. But nonetheless, yeah, I think just because offensive linemen are such a premium and there's not like a disgruntled one right now, as opposed to maybe a few random examples from the previous years, like Trent Williams and such. I know that was during the draft anyway. That was a trade deadline. But nonetheless, yeah, I'm not too shocked. Also, thinking about maybe some of their pieces, like Mike Evans, Godwin. Maybe they just didn't feel like they were going to get the value back. It's like when we talk about, when we're doing fantasy or drawing up fantasy trades. Like sometimes, like we know we value this person more than anyone else. So it's like, it's tough to get, to find what you want. So maybe that was the case. But nonetheless, like you said, literally, it's like, once again, we're hanging out too much, maybe, or it's just that obvious of this game. But I had the same kind of notes you did. Score was deceptive. Really, I feel like the Bills actually kind of controlled this game really well. But once again, not surprising since Tampa has a lot of holes. I mean, even one of the touchdowns Tampa got early on, it was plus territory. I mean, Josh Allen threw an interception on the very first play. I think it was deflected. It was the one that Golston got. So I think they're a defensive lineman. So if I remember correctly, it was deflected. And then, Tampa gets the ball literally basically at the goal, not the goal line, on the red zone. So, almost any offense is going to punch that in the NFL. So, and then, you mentioned the late score to ruin the spread. Luckily, we both picked Tampa, so it wasn't too bad. Yeah. we both should actually kind of worked out for us, although we had very small bets into that. And other note that you mentioned the other guys stepping up, and you saw, I think there was a concerted effort to get them involved and make things easier on the Bills offense, because for the most part, outside of that interception, it was Josh Allen managing the game, doing well. There weren't a lot of deep shots to be had, but sometimes you got to take what the defense gives you, and they did a good job of doing that for the Bills. So, good win for Buffalo. Get back on track on the short week. We were worried they would potentially, fall victim to the short week Thursday night game and, lead to another loss, but they managed to turn it around as they had a couple of concerning performances leading up to this one. But they handled their business, as mentioned, and we'll see if they can continue to evolve that offense with Kincaid and Shakir and maybe Davis. Although I've had my criticisms of K. Davis before. But let's move to the Sunday games. Going to start with the game in your division, which turned out to be a little more competitive than at least I thought. And it was the Philadelphia Eagles. They beat the Washington Commanders 38-31. And obviously, as we're recording right now, as I mentioned, trade deadline occurred. So Washington, after this game, they've already traded away their two defensive ends and Montez Sweat and Chase Young. It's obvious that they're kind of going for a rebuild/reload. But nonetheless, in regards to this game, what were your thoughts, John?
Yeah, I mean, it went the same way the first game went, which I specifically said would not happen, but it basically did. A.J. Brown once again kills the Washington defense, but at the same time, Philly cannot stop Sam Howell in the passing attack. And although I do think it's a credit to Sam Howell and the receivers and the offensive play callers and all that stuff over there, it's the same thing I've been saying for almost 2 years now, that Philly secondary still worries me. We have yet to see the impact of Kevin Byard. I don't even know if he played in this one. If he did, I don't expect him to fully understand the playbook and schemes and everything they got on such short notice.
Tackles.
Okay, well, I mean, that's a lot of tackles, but regardless, even he's a safety. There's only so much that he can do, because if your corners are getting beat on the outside or, over the middle or all these kind of things, there's only so much that he can realistically do. I do think that over time we'll see his impact more and more. Because like I said, I presume, considering, I just don't think they probably put him in a lot of tough spots immediately where he's incredibly relied upon. I assume it was let's just put him deep, try to make sure that, they don't beat us over the top kind of thing with Kevin on that side. And then as he gets more ingrained in the defense, then, we'll bust out some of the more creative stuff maybe. But yeah, overall, I mean, great offense performance from both teams. It was cool to see Washington stop the tush push. I think they were the only team so far to have stopped Philadelphia from doing it. I know a lot of other teams have failed doing it, but I think Philadelphia was basically perfect until that one time where they forced that fumble on the goal line. So that was cool to see. It was a fun game. I'm sure if you're a fan of both teams, it was a stressful one. I saw a lot of Eagles fans, while they were losing, already, declaring A.J. Brown the best receiver in the league. I still think it's Justin Jefferson, but he's having a heck of a year. So he's definitely moving in that top 5 category for me. I don't know about you, but that's certainly a discussion we'll probably have in the offseason. Regardless, I don't know. I mean, I don't really know how to feel about Philadelphia. We've already we've done this song and dance with this exact game a few weeks ago, and now it's just kind of the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this is another one where the score is a bit deceptive. You mentioned the tush push that they would stop, but really, I don't know. It was a fumble. I think it was just really a bad exchange because it led to Washington getting the ball, if I remember correctly. And they're literally knocking on the door there at the goal line. So I think that was just more unfortunate. I did like, and I do think it's funny how that now they have another wrinkle. I'm sure you saw that where they just they
did the fake to Swift.
So that's oh great, now other teams have to think kind of have that in the back of their mind as opposed to going all in. So that'll be interesting to see if that's continued.
Did they do that after the failed one?
I believe so, because I think it was after Washington turned it over on downs. Yeah,
I'm wondering
late in the game.
How long they've been sitting on that, because I bet the plan was the moment a team stops it, next time we're faking it. I bet that was the call, because that's again, funny.
And in my book, I don't know if I would consider Washington stopping it, because once again it's poor exchange, but and I wonder if
stop. If with them being that with the Eagles being that good at that play, you take what you can get. All right, if they didn't convert it, you take your victories.
Yeah, true. But and I wonder if that little stat, because if I remember correctly, I think the Chiefs stopped it in the Super Bowl, but I believe so.
I can't even remember back to last season.
Once again, that may just be this season. But nonetheless, my main point here is I think in regards to the score being a bit deceptive is they also had a fumble by Kenneth Gainwell earlier in the game when they were once again knocking on the door. If I remember correctly, they were literally it was a 1st and goal, and it was a fumble by Kenneth Gainwell. So really, the Eagles could have put up more points. Now, obviously, and like you mentioned, kudos to Washington for creating those turnovers, but it's still could have been worse. Eagles offense, like you mentioned, were kind of had their way, especially in the past game with Washington. And you made the funny comment. Or was it you, or did you put that in the group chat where someone's like, man, it'd be interesting, Jonathan Allen's reaction.
Oh, I didn't put that. Interview. No, I was like, man, is Washington just like Philly's kryptonite? Not necessarily in the fact that like they beat Philly, but last year they beat them, and then somehow this year 2 times they've like made them really sweat. But no, I was not. Yeah, that comment was funny about Jonathan Allen's reaction after trading away the 2 defensive ends. He's still on the team. And here you are. All you got was draft picks in return. So good luck, buddy.
Yeah, we'll see how he feels, and it'll be interesting to see if maybe he's moved in the offseason. But obviously it can't be after this. Last point. I think maybe the reason why Washington, at least as of Sunday and before, given issues to the Eagles is, once again, I think we mentioned before, they had invested 4 first-round picks in that defensive line. Obviously had talent. I know, Chase Young maybe hasn't lived up to his, where he was drafted, but still really talented. And we know those 2 defensive tackles are really good. So, I mean, we saw this game. Swift didn't have the most efficient game. And I believe last time when they played, Philadelphia had issues running the ball as well. So, but obviously, like we mentioned, they still couldn't stop A.J. Brown. And then Devonta Smith had a pretty good impact in this game as well. So, Eagles taking care of business. And it'll be interesting to see what occurs with Washington going forward, because and I know I've mentioned it, definitely need to get new defensive coordinator, and I wouldn't be shocked if Ron Rivera is also on the hot seat, just because, once again, you're a defensive head coach and your defense has been lacking, to say the least. And we'll see the direction they take, especially with new management on board, because apparently management was the ones that really pushed them to trade their 2 defensive ends, at least according to some of the reports out there, while the coaches, I guess, wanted to try to make it work. So, be interesting to see if they management cleans house and, gets, quote unquote, their guys in. So
it's just tough, too, because, honestly, if I'm going to be real, I think Ron Rivera is probably on the brink of getting fired, maybe at the end of the season. And so if you keep, Chase Young, I don't know about Montez Sweat, but Chase Young needs a contract extension. So if you keep them because the coach wants them and then you get rid of the coach, I think that's probably what's happening here, is they just weren't going to give into the coach's demands when they're not actually committed to the coach themselves. Maybe he doesn't get fired, but I'm sure there's thoughts, right? They're not fully committed to Ron Rivera for the future.
So I will say Sweat also is in a contract year, I think, because they picked up his 5th-year option. They didn't pick up Chase Young's, if I remember correctly. So I guess maybe that could have been a reason why, too. It was front office we're not going to pay these 2 guys at their market value because, we're rebuilding. So maybe that's also a reason why they also went for a little bit cheaper than, maybe some expected. But, we'll see what occurs in Washington going forward. And obviously Eagles keep rolling, but they do have starting to get into a tougher part of their schedule as the season goes on. But let's go over to the AFC, where the Jacksonville Jaguars took care of business against the Pittsburgh Steelers, 20-10. So what were your thoughts here? Because I know we both were fearing a Steelers, upset. But the Jaguars handled their business.
Yeah, I mean, all the questions about the Jaguars from the beginning of the season, I think, have kind of faded away at this point because, the Steelers are no joke. This was going to be a tough game, and they came out, they showed up. I love the commitment of Doug Peterson to Travis Etienne. No matter, I mean, there's certain games where I'm like, all right, this is getting a little tiring, but I think now I'm kind of understanding more and more. I think their commitment to the run game is to try and wear out these defenses. They're grounding and pounding a lot, and then we've seen it now multiple times against Buffalo and now Pittsburgh. All of a sudden, late in the game, Etienne seems to still have something left in the gas tank and is able to pull off some big play late in the game, like he did in this one with that huge touchdown reception. So, there's been some big plays that Etienne's able to make. It was nice to see Calvin Ridley back and, involved in this one. Evan Ingram, Kirk have kind of been doing their thing on the year. So, the offense is moving and grooving. They're looking good. And then on the other side too, Jaguars defense, man, I really think they're pretty underrated on the season compared to a lot of the rest of the NFL, because they've been quietly putting up some really strong defensive performances. Although this was against the Steelers, who have not been the best offensively, I don't know, like holding them 10 points I thought was impressive because, they scored well against Baltimore and some of these other teams. And, you did a little bit better. And they did that against Buffalo and London. They've done it against a couple teams. So, yeah, Jacksonville's looking good. For Buffalo, honestly, this was a game that you were supposed to lose. Or sorry, not Buffalo. For Pittsburgh, yeah. For Pittsburgh, this was a game you were supposed to lose. So I'm not taking too much away from it. Same old issues for them, and they're probably going to continue to be a pain in the side of a lot of teams regardless.
Yeah, I mean, they had opportunities this game. Obviously hurts that Kenny Pickett got knocked out with a rib injury, but I think we saw Mr. Trubisky. It's not too far of a step down in regards to Pickett to Trubisky, especially with that offense, as a whole. But, you mentioned Jaguars defense. I just want to piggyback off that because there's two fumbles by the Jaguars offense. Was it one by Bigsby? I think one by Evan Ingram. And kudos to the defense because they immediately forced 3 and outs, which once again, I know it's Pittsburgh, but usually, and we'll talk about more later, usually, especially in the NFL, when you create turnovers usually lead to points. Good teams are able to do that. And and it's always tough as a defense to just trot out there just because of a sudden interception or sudden turnover and get a stop, especially a 3 and out. So kudos to Jacksonville, young team like we mentioned going into the year, but like you said, starting to live up to that potential, taking care of business against a good veteran Pittsburgh team that, like we said, is capable any Sunday of just messing everything up and somehow winning, even though they were horrible for most of the game. So. And and ETN, you mentioned, he's been great. And we mentioned AJ Brown knocking on top 5 wide receiver territory. Be very interesting because ETN is kind of starting. I don't know for you, once again, I know we were both high, you especially on ETN.
No, I'm very high on this guy. He's already there for me.
I'm about to say I haven't sat there once again. We're gonna wait till the end of the season, but I have had the same thought in regards to ETN. Like, man, he's knocking on that top 5 running back.
And the reason for me that he's already there too is because I remember when we did our rankings, I specifically said, listen, after next season, I wouldn't be shocked if we're talking about ETN and Breece Hall. And Breece Hall, he started a little slow, but he's been balling out too. I think he probably has to have, maybe another month of doing this where he's there. But for me, ETN had a great year last year. He's been going crazy. He's there for me. He is there, especially with Josh Jacobs going back to being bad.
Yeah, and then Jonathan Taylor's still kind of
Derrick Henry's slowing down. Really, that whole top 5. I mean, Chubb got hurt, so it's kind of hard to take him out, right? And McCaffrey's balling out, but the other 3, who knows where they'll be at the end of the year? Who knows?
Yeah, so we'll have to wait and see. But Jaguars keep building, keep moving forward. So we'll see what they can do going forward. But let's keep it in the AFC. Go into the AFC East for a divisional matchup, where the Dolphins, they beat the New England Patriots 31-17. Your thoughts here, Don?
Miami handled their business. Honestly, I thought this game was going to be a little bit closer, but good on Miami to get some separation here from New England because the last time we saw them play, it was a little bit closer. I think the main difference was they were able to slow down the passing attack. Both games, the run game was not that efficient for New England, but last time they played, Mac Jones in the passing attack was able to have a little bit more success. And also defensively, New England was able to do a little bit better. In this one, although Raheem Mostert wasn't the focal point, unlike the last time they played, they got both Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle going, which did not happen in the first game. So ultimately good to see. It was at home, so maybe that's a little bit of a boost for you for Miami, not having to go play in New England for that. But yeah, I think it kind of shows the diverging paths these two teams are on. New England's kind of, at the beginning of the year, there was still some questions about Miami, and I still think there are. I mean, based on that stat that I sent you, we'll see. They still have some tests ahead of them. But for New England, yeah, it's starting to look like, man, this is going to be a tough season. I know there was a lot of calls that were made to them apparently about a lot of their players, Kyle Duggar and some of these guys during the trade deadline. They didn't make any moves, but yeah, tough. It's going to be a tough season for the Patriots, man, because ultimately the offense is not looking good, and the defense, yeah, I think they're starting to slowly get a little bit worse too.
Yeah, and it'll be very interesting to see what happens because, like we mentioned, seems like Bill Belichick, the GM, has kind of failed them, and just lack of firepower on offense in a league where offense kind of rules. The rules and the calls favor the offense for the most part. And oddly, New England's either missed with N'Keal Harry in recent years, and or really haven't addressed offense, especially the skill position players. And unfortunately, they lose Kendrick Bourne, who's arguably been their best receiver in recent weeks, so that is also going to hurt them going forward. And other note I made was like New England has to play turnover free to even have a chance. And obviously, Mac Jones had a pretty bad interception at the end of half when they were knocking on the door to maybe at least get a field goal, but that led to a Miami field goal. So 6-point swing before the half, and then obviously the second half happened. And then also wanted to point out too, like even New England's offense struggles. Like 17 points is a little bit of a mirage, because 10 of those points were off turnovers, where Miami literally gave them the ball in near the red zone. So we'll have to see with the Patriots. Obviously, like you mentioned, they didn't do much fire selling, so one has to assume Bill has some sort of plan, for the offseason, or maybe they'll wait till then. But nonetheless, like you said, Miami did took care of business, and good to see Hill and Waddle both have a really good game, especially since I mentioned podcast before, like apparently McDaniel made the comment about Hill maybe missing time, but obviously he didn't. So maybe that was just the smoke screen, and I fell for it. But Dolphins get the win. Obviously, keep trucking along as they go to 6-2. And oddly, New England, if I did see this correct, they technically have the worst record in the AFC. So how the mighty have fallen, for them. So we'll see what happens going forward. But let's go back to the NFC. Let's go to my game. We'll keep this relatively short and sweet. Well, we'll see, because we have a few other things to talk about. But nonetheless, the game itself was pretty self-explanatory, as the Minnesota Vikings beat my Green Bay Packers, 24-10. Unfortunately, though, for the Vikings, obviously lost Kirk Cousins to an Achilles injury in this game. But in regards to the game, what were your thoughts?
I don't really have any. We thought it was maybe questionable, but we both picked the Vikings to win. They handled their business, and I didn't watch a ton of this one, so I'll kind of let you handle it, because I don't really know what to say about the Packers outside of they didn't really do well.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this once again, I'm not giving up on him, but the leash is shortening on Jordan Love. Like, it just feels that way. I know it hasn't been perfect, but there just haven't, especially in recent weeks, there has been many moments that you can at least hang your hat on and be like, okay, like, Jordan's got it, or the offense is just, there hasn't been that many. I know some people are kind of trying to throw, maybe it's just mainly Packer fans, trying to throw some of the blame on Christian Watson, which, hey, may be fair, but like still, it just seems like they don't have a connection. And Watson's only, second year in the league, and he was a raw prospect anyway, coming out. So it just doesn't help that this offense, especially our passing offense, or even our offense as a whole, because our run game can't get going either. It's just sputtering. I don't know the answer. It just feels like, it's a quandary that the offensive staff has been put in, because there is some talent there. They just got to put it together. And obviously, like I said, the quarterback's been inconsistent and Love. And then on the flip side, I'm about, I hate to be the person that says this and does this, but I'm about done with Joe Barry, just because it's the same thing as last year, where it's just extremely conservative and just giving. And listen, I'm fine with a little bit of balance between being conservative and aggressive, but like almost every play or every key down is just Jair Alexander 10 yards off. Like, come on, like at some point, can we be aggressive? Can we show some disguises? Show some guys in the line of scrimmage, send some creative blitzes. Like we've mentioned this. You see the better defenses.
Your star too, like Jair's a superstar corner. Like,
we just paid Rashawn Gary. Like, maybe help Rashawn Gary by getting some more guys in the box so Gary has a one-on-one. Just things like that. And once again, make the offense think, as opposed to, all right, Kirk Cousins lines up, he sees the defense. Okay, like the defense where everyone is, that's like that. He knows that they're not going to disguise or anything. He can read the defense like basically as soon as they break the huddle. So making things easy for the opposing offense. So I think he would need to go. I'm not calling for LaFleur's head. I think it's a tough situation we put in. This is, I think, statistically by age, one of the young. I think it is the youngest offense we have. So, and obviously losing your premier left tackle for the season hurts. I'm sure they were hoping to have him to kind of help stabilize the line, the offensive line. So, yeah, it'd be interesting to see if Love can show some things going through the next few weeks. Because if not, once again, I don't know how the front office would do or what their plan would be. But I would, and once again, I haven't looked at the quarterback class, but I'm just saying, depending on our position, might be.
There's a lot.
There might be reason to look at quarterbacks in the first round.
There might be 5 or so quarterbacks going first round. I'll say that. I mean, it's still early, but there's a lot of top tier prospects at quarterback.
Yeah, I will agree. That does seem to be the buzz that about this draft. But obviously, we'll see, and we'll do our evaluations at the time. We'll let the dominoes fall there. But obviously, the bigger news was Vikings lose Kirk Cousins, Achilles tear, which really hurts because this was contract year for Kirk. And I know we were talking, and many were kind of speculating that Kirk could be on the trade block. But obviously, the injury removes him from that, and it being his last year. So they trade for Josh Dobbs, I guess, to kind of stabilize the offense. But yeah, any thoughts, if you have any, in regards to the Cousins injury?
It sucks, but honestly, I don't know. The Vikings, they were just in such a weird spot, man, because like the season started off really bad, and they had a chance where maybe they could have sold, but Kirk didn't want to leave. And so I think that's kind of the tough part about the injury is like, I feel like they all kind of bought back in because they're sitting at 4-4 right now, and they're on a win streak. And I think that's probably the part that hurts the most is when Kirk said, I'm not leaving, and you start winning a couple games and you're getting closer to Justin Jefferson come back. I imagine the vibe around the locker room was, guys, like, although the season started bad, we can still make a playoff run. Like, sure, the Lions are a few games ahead of us in the division, but there's a lot of season left to be played. We're definitely not out of this race yet. And then the moment that they kind of really catch that stride and you feel like they could be there and Addison's really turning it on and everybody's getting excited about the way this offense could look when Jefferson comes back, boom, the Cousins injury happens. And I feel like it probably just took the wins out of their sails completely. I don't think they're giving up, which is to me indicated by the fact that they went out and traded for Josh Dobbs, and he's filled in decently for the Cardinals. So it'll be interesting to see him in this offense because I think the Vikings, when healthy, definitely have a far better group of receivers and Hawkinson to throw to compared to what Arizona has. So that'll be fun. But it's got to really sting if you're a Vikings fan because, like I said, going on a win streak, Jefferson's comeback is happening here soon. It just really felt like the Vikings were catching their stride only for this to happen, and it really sucks.
Yeah, and last point, too, in regards to you mentioned all that, like the defense, too. Vikings defense has been outperforming, especially expectations, but I think they're definitely have been doing really well. They found their stride recently, too. Like I mentioned, with disguises and blitzes, on the opposite side, Joe Barry, you see Brian Flores doing that and, being creative there, so...
Which was maybe a reason that Danielle Hunter wasn't moved. Like, I know that Cousins' injury happened before, but maybe Danielle Hunter had kind of changed his tune and they felt like there was some belief there and he kind of wanted to stay. I don't know that for a fact, but he was a very popular name for like a month heading into the trade deadline about will they move him, and then he doesn't get traded. I don't know. That feels like not trading him feels like we want to try and win now,
Yeah, so we'll see how it'll be interesting to see too when Justin Jefferson is eligible to come back. Do they? It'll be interesting their position. Like, do they try to bring him back? Do they just tell him, hey, like sit out maybe? And if they go on like some sort of losing streak, who knows? So we'll see. Obviously down the road what happens for them and if what Josh Dobbs can provide. I think they are going with whoever filled in. I'm sorry, I forget.
It's Jaron Hall, rookie from BYU.
Yeah. So I think they're going with him this upcoming week.
He's an athlete. He's not a great thrower, but he can run. So
yeah, so we'll see what happens for them going forward. But tough loss for the Vikings. Let's go to another team that had a tough loss at quarterback and just a tough loss in general. We're going to the Battle of New York, where the New York Jets beat the New York Giants 13-10. This was an ugly game, John, pretty much in every aspect. But what were your thoughts in regards to it?
It was gross. I mean, like, good for the Jets, but this was a gross game. Ultimately, I think it just came down to the Jets just have a few more playmakers, being Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall versus the singular Saquon Barkley. Like that's really my evaluation of this game. I mean, and it's unfortunate too that Tyrod got hurt, because you look at the box score and you're like, wow, they couldn't throw at all. But once Tyrod got hurt, Tommy DeVito comes in and he threw like a couple passes in the first half. And for the entirety of the third quarter and most of the fourth quarter, they did not throw a pass. They only ran the ball because it's a close game. Like the defense was holding up. It was a close game. Tommy DeVito clearly was not having a lot of success out there. The Jets are a good defense. You don't want to make mistakes. So they were just trying to run it. And it just, I mean, like Saquon had a lot of yards, but they weren't able to do it efficiently. Everybody knew they were going to run. There just wasn't a lot there. And that's just a tough situation for you to be the Giants right there. To have to go to your third string quarterback is not ideal. And I don't really, I mean, like I said, ultimately the Jets came out on top. I'm not going to sit here and say this is a less impressive win for them because of the DeVito situation, because once again, they don't have their starting quarterback either. But I think it, like I said, it just simply comes down to you had two guys that you knew could make plays, and Breece and Garrett Wilson. To where with the Giants, the moment Tyrod goes down, it was just Saquon, and just Saquon is not going to beat basically any team in the NFL. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly too, obviously Tyrod got hurt, but I think Darren Waller also got hurt and left this game too. So it already hurt that probably your outside of Saquon, your best passing option also, probably left the game. So yeah, like you mentioned, very tough for New York offense, the Giants offense. Sorry, just both New York teams, very rare. But yeah, you mentioned getting the ball to playmakers. It wasn't a pretty game, but kudos to Zach Wilson. This is just some of the things that we wanted, and I think especially Jets fans, but I think we wanted to see last year, which was you have a good defense, just manage the game. You don't have to make plays the entire game. And he did a very good job managing that. I mean, the Breece Hall touchdown was really just a check down that Breece Hall, made an amazing play. And like you said, just sometimes you just gotta manage the game, get the ball to your playmakers and trust them. You don't have to put it all on your shoulders. But then we saw late in the game when they had to get that field goal to tie it. Just a great throw to Allen Lazard while rolling right. And also just a great job of spiking the ball too, with literally 1 second on the clock to get that field goal off. Was a little generous that the ref was quick, but I mean,
take notes, Dallas. Take notes.
I was about to say I did.
Remember that?
I've heard. I think Andrew Hawkins. He mentioned. Because he has his own podcast stuff, but he mentioned that they did a great job of receiver running to the referee to give him the ball. Yes. Like you mentioned with Dallas, the referee has to spot the ball. The referee did do that for them, and they were already prepared to, clock it and then kick the field goal to tie it, and obviously helped by a little bit of a defensive pass interference that was questionable in overtime. But that's just the way the league is, unfortunately. We could sit here all day and complain about how, and I'll mention it later, but the defensive PIs, it's called a little bit too often, basically, in my opinion. But nonetheless, only other stat I wanted to throw out, which is just indicative of this game. There are more punts than points. 24 total punts between the two teams, as
crazy.
As opposed to 23, as opposed to 23 total points. And once again, they needed overtime for 3 of those points. So kind of wild. But Jets get the win. Hey, sometimes you just got to survive in advance, and that's what the Jets do. And like you mentioned, fortunate for the Giants, and we'll see what happens going forward with the quarterback situation. I believe Daniel Jones might be healthy for next week, but we'll wait and see. But let's go to your game, John, where your Dallas Cowboys got back on track. I think coming off the bye week, right? And they put the beat down on the LA Rams, 43-20. Throw it to you. What were your thoughts?
I'm not going to sit here and act like the Rams were like the greatest team in the NFL, but I do think that some people are kind of underplaying it just because maybe they don't like the Cowboys. But the Rams passing defense had only allowed 4 passing touchdowns on the whole season going into this game. And Dak and the offense did really well. They threw 4 touchdowns on them. So and the beat down, like this was just one of those games where like you look at the team, they won at all 3 phases. Special teams, like they had that huge return. It ended up getting called back, but like Kevontae Turpin had a huge return that would have went for a touchdown. Then they get the 4 touchdowns passing the ball. Defensively, like they were getting sacks, they were causing turnovers. Like Deron Bland got the pick 6. Like they were doing their stuff. They blocked a punt on special teams. So yeah, they won at all 3 phases. It's how it goes in some of these games. Great game for Dallas overall. And that's a way to come off the bye week. And I think that's a good momentum game because you got Philly next week. So it's nice that they can come out and just kind of handle their business in a game that, like I said, I think some people are a little underrating the Rams because although, like I said, they're not the greatest team, they were certainly a solid team. And I think that they deserve a little more credit than they're getting just because of this game. This one result does not define them to me. So yeah, good win for Dallas. I think the only thing that you could really say negatively about them is a lot of fantasy owners are not very happy about Tony Pollard right now. But yeah, it's how the Dallas offense goes. They got a lot of mouths to feed. So there's certain matchups where they're probably just going to rely on the pass a lot. That's how it happens. And also Pollard, I mean, there was a lot of concerns from people who are true Cowboys fans and just people who watched, last year, where it was, can Pollard actually handle the full workload? And that's not just like something people say. It's like the times that Zeke did not play, which was very rare, Pollard would get gassed. Like there was, after 15 touches or so, he would start to get pretty tired and you could see it like slow him down. And so I was a little bit annoyed that they didn't try to bring Zeke back just because I feel like for Pollard to be the best he can be, you need a guy who can be a thumper and take kind of the dirty runs that like you don't really want anybody to do, the short yardage stuff. And they're trying to kind of get Rico Dowdle involved and do that kind of stuff. But I don't know. I still think that maybe they could have got a better option there. But Pollard will be fine. He'll bounce back. And like I said, good win for Dallas. For the Rams, it's how it goes, They got a lot of holes. We've talked about it many times. They're paying the price. There was a very large talent difference between the two teams on full display.
Yeah. I want to mention, you mentioned all 3 phases. That's really what I wrote down too. I mean, I just want to highlight, and I think this really highlights like the Dan Quinn
love that guy
style of defense, where it's just like and I'll mention it in a second, but like it happened in Atlanta too. I remember because my Packers played them twice that year and took both L's, especially that playoff one. Mm-hmm. But once again, I mentioned creative defenses and such. Dan Quinn's great at that, and also great at just seemingly forcing offenses into compounding mistakes, and because they make them one-dimensional. You mentioned that pick 6 obviously made it, and that's the kind of the start, because then it was 3-10. Pick 6 happens. Kind of a poor throw by Stafford, great play by Bland. Obviously, but so it makes it 17-3, and then defense forces a punt, but then like you mentioned, they block the punt and they get the safety, and then I'm guessing that was another return that had a penalty, because at least from what I'm seeing, maybe ESPN doesn't mention penalties, but I know that off the safety, Turpin got y'all to the 13, LA 13, that's what it says here, and then y'all punched it in from there.
There was another one that would have been a touchdown.
So there you go. So
it was on. So I think it was on the safety. Actually, is literally it got returned and there was a flag and they had to redo it. I could be wrong on that. But there was one that got called back.
Well, regardless, he got y'all to the LA 13. Obviously, he had only got 13 more yards to punch it in. And then 26-3. It's obvious Rams are already kind of one-dimensional, but absolutely not. They're just going to draw back and pass, and that is the strength of Dallas is their pass rush, and they still have, like we mentioned, good corner play. Bland stepped in last year and did well, and obviously we saw this game he did well too, obviously with the interception, but in coverage in addition. So, just a good win for them, and we'll see if they can build this carry this momentum onto next week, especially in regards to the passing game, like you mentioned, because you definitely probably need that to be firing all cylinders against the Eagles, because like you mentioned earlier, seems to be that's the one hole in their defenses you can definitely throw on them. So we'll see if they can take that performance on. I'm not sure if they go to Philadelphia, but to Philadelphia next week against the Eagles. Dallas handles their business there. Let's go to New Orleans, where the Saints finally saw their offense kind of reach their full potential as they beat the Indianapolis Colts 38-27. Your thoughts here?
I don't have a ton. I mean, I thought the Saints were ultimately going to be the better team. I expected this to be far lower scoring, so I guess that's somewhat of an encouraging sign from the Saints, is they were finally able to have a game in which they put up a lot of points, because I did not think they were honestly capable of 38. They had not really done that the whole year. But, I mean, they came out this game, and I'm wondering if maybe it's just the addition of Alvin Kamara finally being back is able to put a lot of stuff into place. We saw Taysom Hill have a big game. I don't know. I just think the offense is they're finding their groove, which is kind of scary for the division, because the Saints are a very good team. Like, defensively, they have a lot of talent, and they're one of the better defenses in the NFL. And we have yet to see Chris Olave really get going. Kamara's back from suspension. Michael Thomas is actually healthy and like having a solid season, knock on wood. And Derek Carr is a good quarterback. So you put all these pieces together, they certainly can potentially make something happen. And they're sitting at 4-4. They, I don't know. Ultimately, I predicted the Saints to, I think, be the 7th seed. I can't remember exactly the seeding I put them in, but regardless, yeah, very encouraging game, despite the fact that the Colts are not the greatest. Encouraging game, I think, from the Saints, just from the standpoint of being able to put some good tape on, in terms of your offense.
Yeah, I think I mentioned last week, or we broke down last week how Carr was being way too conservative. I don't know if he listens, doubt he does, but yeah, it seemed to be the opposite. He seemed to, obviously be aggressive, as we mentioned with Rashid Shaheed. He, 3 receptions, 153 yards. It was obvious that they were letting it fly deep, and we kind of saw it open up the offense. A little more Taysom Hill too, seeing they're getting him involved. In the run game, or a little bit trickery in the pass game, in regards to him, being a quote unquote quarterback there. So yeah, that was. And weird thing about Shaheed too is like this is his lowest snap count. So I'm not sure if it was like maybe they're kind of going with a little bit like the Pollard thing that you mentioned, where they're just going to limit his snap count so maybe he could, just have a overall better output when he is on the field as a deep threat. So, I don't know if that's, conducive to that, but yeah. And then only other note I really had was Indianapolis defense. Like you've mentioned, I really wrote that down. Yeah, like you've mentioned, just kind of on the downturn in regards to recent years. We're seeing, especially in the secondary. So we'll see. Like I said, I'm interested to see what they do. It seems like their offense is going on the right direction, just thinking long term. So it's funny because I feel like they've invested a lot. Like they spent a few years where they went first round, like defensive end stuff, and it just hasn't really worked out. It's like Kwity Paye and such. So we'll see what they do going forward and how they manage their backfield too. Because like Jonathan Taylor had a good game too, and then like Zach Moss did as well. So it's like I don't know if they're going to just keep kind of doing 50-50 for them. We'll see. I'm sure it's frustrating a lot of Jonathan Taylor owners.
Well, as one, I can say that Taylor's snap percentage has increased each week. So I don't think Zach Moss will go away. Like he's going to be involved because he's had a really good season. Yeah. But I do think that Jonathan Taylor will eventually get to the 70% of the snaps kind of workload that people are hoping. I don't know if he'll get to the 90% like people really want, but yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, that is right. He did miss most of the season, so it could just be easing him back in. Reno running back's a physically demanding position, as we've seen. We mentioned Josh Jacobs, who we'll talk about later. He's got off to a slow start, and he held out, all of training camp. So, maybe the Colts taking a smarter approach and increasing his workload as time goes on. But let's keep it in the Colts division as we go to actually kind of the same two divisions as we go to the Carolina game, as the Panthers avoid a winless season. They get their first win, beating the Houston Texans 15-13. But definitely for Panthers fans, felt like a little bit of validation game, as Bryce Young arguably had his best game as a pro. And they got that game-winning field goal too, so they had their quote-unquote Bryce Young clutch moment. What were your thoughts, though, in regards to the Panthers beating the Texans?
I really saw almost none of this game because, it's for anyone I was watching the Cowboys game during the morning slate. I did have Red Zone on the side, but it was very rare that I was paying attention. And this game just didn't have a lot of touchdowns, so there wasn't a lot of times that this one was the one being shown. So I don't really have a lot of thoughts. I mean, I don't think both teams are that great. It would have been nice for Houston to get the win because they'd be sitting at 4-3, and although 3-4 is not the worst, there's still definitely a chance that they could be, going for a playoff spot. It would have been nicer to be 4-3 for Carolina. So who knows? Maybe you just need to see one, and you can maybe go on a little bit of streak here. But yeah, ultimately, if you had told me that this was going to be a close game heading into the season, nobody would have been shocked because Houston has kind of overperformed to start the season. And who knows? Maybe they're coming back down to earth. I don't know. Like I said, I really did not watch almost any of this game, so I don't have a lot of thoughts.
Yeah, there wasn't much in regards to it. I mean, I will say Bryce Young seemed to be much more decisive and quicker with his decision making, and we saw that obviously with, like I said, obviously his best game. Still took a lot of sacks, but I think that just kind of comes with the fact that their offensive line is poor, and that their run game is pretty meh. On top of that, and then also want to give credit to Carolina defense. We've mentioned in previous years, like, this is a talented defense. And I think especially now that in the game where their offense wasn't totally inept, we saw the defense was able to impose their will on Houston and limit the run game. And although some of the Houston pass catchers, they're young guys like Tank Dell, Nico Collins, have had good moments, still young, still developing, as a whole, especially as a team. But you can see that in regards to this game where it wasn't easy on Stroud in the offense, and what's against Stroud too. I'm not excusing him. He's obviously still growing and such. And this was Carolina threw a lot of curveballs at them, and just not a lot of guys open in the pass game for Stroud in crucial moments. So yeah, kudos to Carolina for getting that win, getting that monkey off their back. Because I'm sure, like I said, I'm sure it's definitely much more pressure filled whenever you are winless and you keep, and especially as the year goes on, you keep losing. So now you get that one win, like you mentioned, and probably make it easier to get win number 2 and just less pressure overall in the building. So we'll see if they can't get that second win going forward. But like I said, nonetheless, Carolina avoids the old line. Was it the line? Or is it the Browns? I know the Browns did. The Lions also got 1-16. Like they did too, right? Yep. Yeah, the Dan Orlovsky year, fortunately. So they avoid being put in that infamous bad territory. But speaking of bad territory, let's go to the Titans game where the Titans, with Will Levis in his first NFL start, pull off, I would say, an upset over the Atlanta Falcons, 28-23. He obviously had a great game, a little bit of a DeAndre Hopkins revival game. What were your thoughts in regards to the Titans win?
It was nice to see what they were able to do with Will Levis and I texted this in the group chat. Although I don't think Will Levis had the greatest of performances, it was better than anything we've seen out of this offense so far. So that was nice to see just from that standpoint, because it's been rough. It has been a really rough season for Tennessee, and being able to throw for 4 touchdowns, great performance. Especially, Atlanta's defense is no joke. Like, they have a lot of playmakers. It's not like this was some slouch defense. So that was nice to see. I'm still not putting all my eggs in the Levis basket. If I'm the Titans, I am. Like, I'm not starting what's it called? Tannehill again, because there's no point. Like, what is Tannehill realistically going to get you? I thought that there was maybe even a chance that they would go out there and potentially trade Tannehill, because it just, there's nothing that you get by playing Tannehill at this point. You're not a great team. And it's clearly not working. So Will Levis being able to do what he did, I think it's time to just give the kid the season and see what he can do. And maybe he can do something special. Who knows? If he can't, you'll find that out during the season, because like I said, they have not been able to look good during the season anyway. So you might as well just see what the kid's got. Now, that said, I think Will Levis's performance is being a little bit overhyped. He did throw 4 touchdowns, yes, but a vast majority of his passes were underneath. There was not a ton of actual deep stuff that was going on outside of the touchdown passes. They were very open. I'm not saying this to trash Will Levis. It's just the fact of the matter. Like, Hopkins was getting open, and that's a veteran guy. He's one of the best receivers in the league, has been for a long time. So it's not shocking to see that. And the big thing to me was that there was quite a few passes from Will Levis that were off target, where they were like behind the receiver or different things like that. And I only bring that up to say that there's a lot of people that are kind of already crowning Will Levis and all this stuff. Just let's give the guy time. It was his first game. It was very encouraging to see. I liked what I saw, so much so that I'm willing to say, let this guy be the quarterback the rest of the season. All right. That's where I'm at. So I'm not going to crown him because we've already seen multiple people do that this season with Brock Purdy and all these people. And at some point they come back down to earth. And I don't want Will Levis to have a game where DeAndre Hopkins maybe isn't getting open like he was. And so you're not able to have these big touchdown passes. And then all of a sudden everybody, and maybe it's in prime time, and all of a sudden everybody starts focusing on the fact that he didn't have the greatest accuracy. But we knew that when he came out. Both of us agreed. He's got a lot of the athletic tools. He's just a little bit raw. And so who knows? Let's let the kid play, and we'll see how it pans out. But yeah, I think the Titans should at least commit to letting him play the rest of the season, because there's no point to playing Tannehill. You gain nothing.
Yeah, and you got to see what you got, especially since 2 straight years of investing in quarterbacks. Malik Willis seems to be not living up to the expectations thought of him. We'll see. He's still young. He was also considered raw, and you mentioned Will Levis, obviously doing a little bit further along. So yeah, obviously we'll see what happens. But only thing I want to mention was great game by D Hop. Good for him, and as along with Levis. But like, I do want to note, like, the first touchdown was PI, offensive PI. Like he shoved AJ Terrell like out of bounds and was able to use that momentum to get himself open. But I do have to credit the other 2 touchdowns. Obviously, that was great plays by D Hop, and obviously good throws by Will Levis, especially in his first. I do want to give a little bit of credit there, like, because we'll talk about it later. There's some quarterbacks had wide open wide receivers downfield and multiple times and missed them. And we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, the funny part about Levis was actually the deep passes that when they were rare, but when he threw them, those were the best ones.
Yeah, especially the intermediate
stuff. Yeah,
last one I actually think was the best because I was just
to Westbrook-Ikhine
because that was right in the breadbasket. Even though he, Levis was kind of rolling right, it was like opposite kind of field throw.
Yeah, he bought time.
Good. Yeah, so could potentially help the Titans. I think, like you mentioned, give them a little more dynamicism, if that's a word, where you have to worry about leaving some of these receivers one-on-one, because hey, maybe he showed that he can at least take some deep shots and give his receivers chances, like you mentioned. So teams may not be able to load the box against Derrick Henry. We saw Henry have a pretty efficient game too. But important caveat may be also the fact that this is Vrabel, again, going up against Arthur Smith, and Arthur Smith came from Tennessee. So sometimes you see in these matchups where one guy has the advantage over the other. This time master over protege, because maybe he has a good feel for what Arthur likes to do, especially on offense and things like that. And that leads me to the next point. Interesting to see that Desmond Ridder, he did get a concussion, but he was cleared to return, but they didn't put him back in. They went with Taylor Heineke, especially in the second half, and just the offense seemed to flow better, even though Heineke was thrown into the situation. So it'll be interesting to see what they do
on that.
Forward. Yeah,
Arthur Smith said that Ridder was not benched due to performance, and he didn't necessarily say that Ridder was going to be starting quarterback next week. But the fact that he said he was not benched due to performance, to me, indicates he's going to be the starting quarterback again next week. I could be wrong, but the cynic in me believes it's Ridder.
I don't know. Yeah, it seems like he took a few bad sacks too, and like I said, the offense seemed to flow much better with Heineke in the second half, but we'll see what they choose to do. Obviously, I understand if they do go with Ridder, like we mentioned, although we would both disagree. It's understandable because they want to see what they got in Ridder, since in terms of what he can do, since they did invest, I know it wasn't a high pick, but they invested in him and they want to see what he can do. So we'll see what direction they go going forward in regards to the Atlanta QB situation. But good one for the Titans. Not that this affects anything really much because they're still under 500 and 3-4. And yeah, tough loss for the Falcons because their division's all weird and going 500 is not good. So let's move on to Seattle, where the Seahawks managed to come back late and get a touchdown to beat the Browns 24-20. Your thoughts here in regards to Seahawks getting this big win?
Well, good win for Seattle. This is nice to see. I think I don't think they are now the second seed in the NFC as of today. They are the division leader with the Niners losing. We'll talk about them later. And at the trade deadline, we saw them go out and make a move to get a piece, adding Leonard Williams. And I like the move. I think it shores up a position group that we have talked about a long time with this defensive line. And it just adds another piece to that fold that he's good at stopping the run. He can get after the quarterback. He can do a lot of things that I think is going to be exciting for this defense. Now, you were facing PJ Walker, so I'm not going to go out here and say this is like the most impressive win. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, Seattle did what they needed to do. They got the win. They're sitting at 5-2, and they did their thing.
Yeah, Seattle's weird because, like, I won't say weird, but I think they're like have a little bit of that Dallas in them where like they're so momentum based. Because you saw early in this game, like Kenneth Walker broke like a 55-yard or 50-ish yard run, or maybe 45. But nonetheless, that was like most of his yards for the game. And like the first three possessions is where they got 17 of their points, and then up until that last drive, Seattle completely stalled out. Like they were having issues. I mean, had a couple of interceptions, obviously from Geno and such. But yeah, so kudos to their defense in that meantime. I know obviously Cleveland eventually clawed their way back in this game and led, but we've seen before where, especially with Seattle next to not moving the ball at all, defense kept them within striking distance. And then obviously Seattle late in the game made some crucial plays to see Jackson Smith and Jigba a little more involved, and obviously getting a touchdown there at the end to give them the lead. But yeah, like you mentioned, it is PJ Walker, and that seemed to be the game plan for Seattle's defense. Was they're gonna crowd in line of scrimmage, try to take away the run game, make PJ Walker beat you with his arm. And I think we saw late, especially since they threw the interception that kind of set up that touchdown at the end of the game. PJ Walker's limitations. So we'll see.
Yeah.
Obviously, be interesting to see, the whole Deshaun Watson and his health situation as well.
The reports are already that he still may rest during Week 9. So,
yeah. So we'll see, if they can keep just staying afloat. Because once again, they were competitive. They had a chance to win this game. They just, didn't close that out. So we'll see if the Browns can get back on track. But obviously, you mentioned the Seahawks, kings of the NFC West, at least for this week. We'll see if they can continue that going forward.
Do we know? Have they played the Niners already? And when?
I don't think they have. But I will say they have given the Niners issues when they have played them. Like in regards to they've made those games close.
They don't play them for a month. They got to play Baltimore, Washington, L.A., the Rams, and then the Niners. And they play they got a tough 4-game stretch.
I see that.
They played the Niners, then the Cowboys, then the Niners again, then the Eagles. That is a tough 4-game stretch they got there. That is...
and for being honest, like Tennessee right afterwards, who knows with Tennessee? We've seen them. They could be a surprise. And
Pittsburgh right after, which Pittsburgh at that point, that could be prime Pittsburgh, where they're like, they have to win to stay in the playoff race to get the 7th seed.
Against the wall, Pittsburgh is very scary.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm wondering, where is that game played? It's in Seattle, so at least they have that. But I don't know. Regardless, yeah, that's a tough end of the season. But those Niners games are going to be really interesting. Let me click here. I want to see where the first one is.
It's the first one Seattle, is in but it's on Seattle. A Thursday night. So
I don't know. Like, all I'm saying is, who knows where San Francisco will be in a month, because they're struggling now. But who knows where they'll be in a month? But let's just say they don't really quite find their form, and going into that game, Seattle is still the division leader, because San Francisco, they got to play Jacksonville. They have their bye week this week, then Jacksonville, then Tampa. I mean, Jacksonville could be a tough one, right? Tampa, they should win, but even then, Tampa's been competitive. They got pieces.
It could be a tough matchup.
Yeah, exactly. So, I don't know. Going into that game against Seattle, that could be a really fun one to watch, because, like you said, San Francisco-Seattle games are always good. Like, it's a great modern-day rivalry.
Yes, and yeah, I'll just mention too, like Seattle, they're one. What we mentioned, creativity, things like that. They're very good on defense at just being creative, throwing it, throwing some different blitzes disguised as different looks, getting their guys. They love to get the Jamal Adamses and some of their playmakers or even Devin Witherspoon, some of those guys
and he's in
positions to make
baller,
plays.
Man.
Yeah. So,
Witherspoon's been having a great year.
Yeah, that's like I said, that defense is on the rise, like we've been alluded to. Like the secondary is looking better and better.
Add Leonard Williams, like that's a scary piece to add.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, Leonard's gonna do all the dirty work, like he already said, like do all the and he can do a little bit more. So it'll be fun to see how Seattle continues and ends their season here. But like I said, tough stretch there. We'll see, what they do. Be a good litmus test. But let's go over to one of the surprising upsets of the weekend, and it was the Denver Broncos getting the win over the Kansas City Chiefs. Let me make sure I got the score right. 24-9. Obviously, a huge, upset. There was a little bit of criticism because Mahomes was apparently seen at the World Series game. It was a Friday or Saturday, I forget. But then obviously there's a report that he was ill too, so it's like not the best look. Nonetheless, your thoughts in regards to the Broncos pulling off the upset here, John?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately the Broncos just kind of shut down everything the Chiefs wanted to do in the passing attack. Like Kelsey did not have a great game. I mean, he had 6 for 58, which for any other tight end is like a solid performance. But for Travis Kelsey, that's a disappointment, right? Rashee Rice had an okay game. Everybody, I mean, like there was a lot of people involved here, but they just couldn't finish it. They couldn't get touchdowns, and that was the problem. Like they had opportunities. They moved the ball well. Like in terms of offensive yardage, they had more yards. It wasn't big, but they had 35 more yards total. They had almost triple the passing yards of Denver. They didn't quite have the rushing yards, but like yards per play, they were more efficient. All these kind of things. It just came down to they shot themselves in the foot too many times. They had 1 less penalty, but 3 more penalty yards, and they had 5 turnovers. Like 5 turnovers to the Broncos 1. If you told me going into this game that the Chiefs were going to turn the ball over 5 times and Denver was only going to turn over to once, especially considering how close last time they played was, everybody knew that they were going to lose this game. Like based on that, if you had told someone that. So yeah, I'm not holding it against the Chiefs. Good teams have bad performances. The Eagles lost to the Jets. The Niners have lost 3 straight. These kind of games happen. But I will say I was a little bit surprised that Kansas City wasn't maybe a bit active in terms of trying to go after a receiver at the deadline. I don't know who would have been available because the team that had the receivers that were very publicly available was the Broncos. And I don't think that they would want to trade Judy or Sutton to Kansas City. And especially, I don't think they would trade them to the Kansas City without raising the price just because of a divisional tax. So I don't know if that deal would have ever been able to get done, but I don't know. I was expecting Kansas City to maybe go out there and try and get some reinforcements in the receiver spot.
Yeah, well, I mean, they did before this game. They brought back McCole Hardman.
Yeah, but I'm thinking a little more established.
Yeah, obviously, and I agree with you. They need someone more reliable to make Hardman.
Yeah,
and I want to piggyback that because that's what I wrote was this untimely turnovers, MVS fumble early in the second quarter when they finally kind of started to get a drive going near midfield. Like I've said before, MVS he's gonna drop it whether it's a pass or in that instance a fumble. Just saying, it's costly stuff. And then obviously later, though more crucial, I mentioned Hardman. He had a muff punt that literally, led to it. All Denver had to go was 10 yards and score. I do want to say in regards to Denver, I'm not trying to take away anything from them. They're very patient on offense, especially with the run game. That's something that I wish Kansas City was more patient with because like the game was never really like that far out of reach. And yeah, especially if Mahomes is, apparently feeling ill, like why not lean on the run game a little bit more? Regardless, too, like we mentioned before, like they've played their best when they've been balanced, and obviously, I don't know why this game they went more the other way, and obviously, it hurt too. I mentioned turnovers, but also mistakes because there was a chance late in the game. It was about 5 minutes left. I'm trying to remember. No, sorry, it was early in the fourth quarter. I have my things wrong. Like 8 minutes left. I'm not sure if you saw it. It was that pass on a 4th down to Sky Moore in the end zone. Sky Moore literally in his breadbasket drops it. and that was turnover on downs. And there's unfortunate because that was literally a 7-point swing there. And, maybe Chiefs get momentum if that's, 21-16, maybe a little more life, a little more pressure on Denver. Who knows? But obviously brutal drop there by Sky Moore. And yeah, like you mentioned, unfortunately Chiefs were unable to bolster that wide receiver room. So yeah, I don't know if I had a prediction in regards to how they correct it. I mean, maybe find ways to, obviously I think balance is the first one, but obviously maybe find ways to get Jerick McKinnon the ball, because he was kind of their guy late in the season too, where he had a couple of plays where there'd be screens and such. So maybe they need to find ways to utilize him in the passing game. But yeah, very interesting to see if they can right the ship there. Which, I mean, I trust they will. They're Kansas City. They're still a really good team. Like you said, they lost the turnover battle 5-1, and they still had a chance in this game late to win or make a comeback. Not sky isn't falling, but like we mentioned, it's the NFL. Like it's tough to. It's not college where Alabama could probably have 3 turnovers and still destroy whoever they're playing. 50 to. I think that's what annoys me about people too. Is sometimes they'll be like, everyone. A lot of people bring up the fact that Denver. Oh man, this defense that let up 70 points against Miami. Like, yeah, that happened, and yes, it was a terrible performance. But it's the NFL. Teams change. Teams adjust.
Matchups kind of week to week.
Yes, and this isn't. It's not like this Denver defense is not talented. We saw this defense was damn good last year. It was their saving grace at times. Remember, because we were saying, man, that poor defense, they're holding teams to under 20, and the offense can't get more than 12 points. Mm-hmm. So, yes, they have talent, and yes, they let go of some guys like Randy Gregory and Frank Clark. But it's obvious that I think they believe in their young guys, Benito and Baron Browning. They played really well too. So I think it just seems like they just wanted to get those guys more opportunities, more playing time, and more experience. So, good win for Denver and keeps them kind of relevant, 3-5. And yeah, tough loss for the Chiefs, but yeah, only their second loss of the year. It's going to happen. Chiefs are a little bit like the Warriors before I move on to, I feel like, of the NFL, where every time basketball and anyone else knows, like Warriors, especially in their prime, is Steve Kerr always be like, man, we just got to limit the turnovers. Mm-hmm. We can't, and that's what it is with Kansas City. You just got to limit the self-inflicting wounds there. So
it's one of those teams where, like, I literally was thinking about this earlier today. It's like, okay, the Chiefs could honestly lose to, quite frankly, anybody in the NFL, and the natural response is they'll be fine. They're the Chiefs. And what a luxury to be a fan of that team, because that, like, yeah, they might have a bad game, but then you look at the scoreboard or the stats and all these things, and you're like, okay, we know why they lost. It's because they beat themselves. And that's what you're saying with the Warriors. If they don't beat themselves, it's very hard to beat them. Very hard.
Yes. Yeah. So I probably just got to clean up some things, and maybe the wide receiver concern may not even be a big issue if they clean up those silly mistakes and turnovers. So I'm sure they will. But yeah, like I mentioned, big win for the Broncos. Let's go over to it kind of was an upset, not really though, because these two are two premier teams. As the Cincinnati Bengals, they beat the San Francisco 49ers 31-17. So a little bit of surprise there. What were your thoughts in regards to the Bengals beating the 49ers?
Yeah, talk about two teams that are kind of going opposite directions. The Niners are starting to drop some games, and the Bengals are really hitting their stride. The thing that really stood out to me the most about the Bengals was Joe Burrow's mobility. He was able to move. There was plays where he was under pressure, and he made things happen. And I think that's a sign of the injury not affecting him nearly as much. He's kind of back to looking like Joe Burrow that we thought. Jamar Chase is balling out, like T. Higgins is getting involved, all these kind of things. So I'm not quite ready to say, oh, the Bengals are back, all this kind of stuff, because it's a long season still, but they're certainly starting to look like the team that we all expected them to. And now sitting here at 4-3, they're in a good spot moving forward. So I'm liking what I'm seeing out of Cincinnati, and I really felt like this was a statement game for them and the rest of the NFL of like, hey, those early struggles that we had where we were dropping games to teams we shouldn't, you cannot take us lightly. We are still the Cincinnati Bengals with the premier quarterback and receivers and all these kind of things. So really good game from Cincinnati. And for San Francisco, man, things are starting to get a little bit worrisome. They're still 5-3, so I'm not necessarily talking about on the season, but what's going on here? Are teams figuring you out schematically? Did you maybe show too much in the Dallas game? Because after that, this is when this skid has kind of, happened. I'm not saying that San Francisco is by any means going to miss the playoffs or anything like that, but as we talked about, Seattle is now holding division lead, and this needs to be a wake-up call game because San Francisco is too talented of a team with too good of a coaching staff to allow this to continue. So I expect it to be something that we're going to see a bounce back here soon. And what a good time to have your bye week too. You have this skid. You need to come out after the bye week and really show, hey, we're still the Niners against Jacksonville. So the rest of their season is also, it's not the easiest. You got Seattle twice still. You got that Jags game. We already talked about the Bucs, and you still got the Eagles and the Ravens on the schedule. So it's not going to be an easy one by any means, but yeah, a very good win for the Bengals, and for the Niners needs to be a wake-up call because, like I said, teams are kind of starting to figure them out, even with the big performances from Ayuk and Kittle. Like they had big days, but clearly defensively, Joe Burrow was able to kind of shred the zone. I think the reason they went out and got Chase Young was, although the defensive line has a lot of big names with Hargrave, with Nick Bosa, they weren't actually as good as they were statistically last year. They weren't getting as many pressures, all these kind of things. Even Bosa himself has not been as effective. And the biggest thing was the opposite side of Bosa. They weren't getting the same pressure they're kind of accustomed to. So that's why they went out and made the move to get Chase Young. And yeah, we'll see if it can pay dividends for him. Because if they can start getting pressure back on the QBs, then they can be in a little better of a spot. Because as we saw with Joe Burrow, I mean, allowing him to go 28-32, it's going to be tough to win a game when the quarterback can do that on the other side.
Yeah, I think in regards to the defense, obviously Young will help generate more pass rush, obviously create more havoc. And yeah, I do agree. Bosa's has been a bit lesser than last year. I think something I mentioned with Green Bay, and I think, once again, this is a new DC and Steve Wilkes, so maybe he's still figuring it all out. And I'm assuming over the bye week, maybe that this will help, like you said, in regards to him finding more wrinkles, because I mean they had relied a little bit on simplicity and their talent up until recent weeks, and it seems like teams have realized that, especially like the Vikings. They're a team that's not afraid to throw downfield, and especially with that, they still kind of run that. San Francisco still runs that kind of Seattle type scheme where they're going to leave their corners kind of on islands at times, and rely on you to kind of throw back and drop back and make some throws outside of the hashes. And obviously, we know Kirk Cousins and the Vikings are able to do it and love to do that. And yeah, we saw this week with the Bengals, Joe Burrow's great at that. And you mentioned him shredding the zones. He's great against the zone. So yeah, I think the San Francisco needs to, kind of like how I mentioned with Green Bay, they kind of, Wilkes and them kind of need to go back to being a little more creative at times. And I think they can. Obviously, they have the talent to do so. And yeah, like I said, getting Young will help. He's already an upgrade to whoever they had opposite side of him. And even if not, just another depth guy for them. And also, I think for their offense, just some turnovers have been an issue too. Purdy losing a fumble, a couple of interceptions, and then they also haven't had Deebo Samuel. So I think we're kind of seeing, Deebo is also a guy that they can throw kind of like McCaffrey, but obviously a wide receiver where they can throw the screens or throw some of those short passes, and then he can get more than the play designed by breaking a couple of tackles, and then he makes a couple of those plays every game that buys you a couple first downs or maybe even a touchdown. And obviously he has been sorely missed for the Niners, so hopefully they get him back off the bye week. So we'll see. But yeah, tough loss for them. And like you said, yeah, we'll see if they can look in the mirror and resolve some of their issues going forward during the bye week. And they need to, because yeah, tough schedule to end the year, and you definitely want home field in the NFC. And also, sorry, last note I wanted to make too, Cincinnati defense, credit to them too, because I just feel like they never really get a lot of credit. Everyone focuses on Burrow and the offense, but Cincinnati defense did a great job of, like I said, forcing those turnovers and also not letting the run game get going. Kind of like they took that formula from Minnesota as, hey, let's invest to stop the run. Although Purdy had a good day, like you mentioned, getting the ball to Kittle. Now you still had a couple of mistakes, interceptions and such. So yeah, kudos to the Cincinnati defense for kind of just once again being the unsung hero for this team while the offense has been figuring it out. So yeah, let's move on over to the Battle of the Birds, last game of the Sunday afternoon slot. And it was the Ravens taking care of business. Another deceptive score. It was 31-24, but, and this is my only note I want to mention this game. This darn Cardinals scored 9 points in the last minute and 37 to cover. And this is one of my big bets of the week. And of course, they covered and I lost on that one. But any thoughts here, John?
Yeah, unfortunate that Arizona covered. I didn't put as much as you did, but yeah, it's how it goes. I mean, the Ravens, they did their job. Like you said, the score wasn't actually as close as it looks. They 17 of their 24 coming in that fourth quarter. So for the most part, Baltimore was pretty dominant in this game. Looks like Kyler Murray should be back. They are 1-7, but I don't know. Arizona, we've seen a lot of the season. They've been incredibly competitive. So I'm really interested to see how they look with Kyler Murray back. Because, young tight end and Trey McBride, maybe he's starting to show up. You add in the fact that you got Hollywood Brown, Michael Wilson, who knows how he'll look with Kyler Murray. James Conner, I think, is scheduled to come back sometime here soon. So there's a lot to like maybe about Arizona. They're not going to be making the playoffs. They're already 1-7, but a lot to maybe build upon for next year. And then for the Ravens, they did their thing. I don't have a lot of takeaways outside of, shout out Gus Edwards because he's filling in valiantly at least the last 2 weeks, considering the injuries they've had at running back.
Yeah, agreed. And I just want to piggyback on the Kyler Murray point because it'll be interesting. Cause I'm not sure if I mentioned this on the podcast before, but if I am, I'm doing it again. I know I mentioned it to you before. It'd be very interesting to see him in an offense that's going to be more complex than what
old Cliff
Kingsbury ran. He's actually going to be under center, probably have some actual action plays, things like that.
Right.
And yeah, like you mentioned, this offense has been a little bit more creative and has a little more depth in regards to, Hollywood Brown, obviously, but then Michael Wilson and, the young tight end and McBride. So, yeah, it'd be very interesting. And obviously, how will he come back off that ACL? But, and even then, just like I said, the way this offense is, they may not need to rely on his athleticism at the start. So they may help in his recovery back. But obviously, we'll see. Because they may throw out Clayton Tune this next game and take their time with Kyler. Who knows?
Yeah. And I do want to add about McBride, too. Is I think a lot of people forget, like, this guy was a second-round pick last year. So there's a lot of promise there with him specifically.
Yeah. And as we always mention with tight end, sometimes it takes a little bit. Not everyone. At times it takes, a year, 2 years. We saw with Kelsey, it took, 3 years till he actually became, the prominent feature guy. Or even just be the starting tight end, basically. So, yeah sometimes it's a tough position. You're asked to do a lot, fill a lot of different shoes, depending on the offense. But, he's definitely an intriguing young guy looking forward in their offense. But let's go to the Sunday night game. Unfortunately, not much to cover as the LA Chargers handled their business. Brandon Staley, hot seat cools just a little bit as they beat the Chicago Bears 30-13. What were your thoughts in regards to the Chargers handling their business?
Yeah, they did what they were supposed to do, but it's the Chicago Bears, and they got a backup quarterback who's a rookie, and their starting running back didn't play. Like, I don't know, man. I'm not going to sit here and say it was a bad win because, they did what they were supposed to do, and they did it convincingly. But ultimately, like, the Bears are a bad team. The fact that your records are even close, like, to me, it doesn't cool off the hot seat. The only thing that could have made this game affect the temperature, I guess, would be if they lost, because then it's like, wow, like that's embarrassing. Now, obviously, who cares what I think? I'm not even a Chargers fan. I'm not the owner, but yeah, like playing a team like Chicago, you did what you were supposed to do because you're supposed to be the far more talented and better team. I will say, I did like that we got a little bit more Quentin Johnston in this one. He had a career high, which, he's 7 games into the season. Yeah, but he had a career high in yardage at 50. So that was nice to see. I'm hoping they can maybe continue to get him a little bit more involved. One play was like a short screen pass that went for, a big play. They also targeted him twice in the red zone. He wasn't able to come up with either of those, but yeah, I'd like to see him maybe get a little bit more involved because, unfortunately for the Chargers, as we've seen this season, they're not the healthiest. We've already seen Mike Williams go down. Josh Palmer missed a little bit of time in this game and came back. Gerald Everett did not play in this one. So, you gotta start getting the chemistry with Quentin Johnson. He's a first round pick. All of a sudden, people are already starting to freak out. Oh my gosh, he might be a bust. This and that. It's not necessarily to prove the doubters wrong, but more so just we can't bank on this Chargers receiving core being healthy because we've just seen too many times they haven't been. And yeah, knock on wood once again, because I don't want to see anybody else get hurt. But you got to get that going, because if you want any hope of making the playoffs coming out of this 3-4 hole that you're in, you're going to need all the help you can get. So yeah, I mean, they did what they were supposed to do. The playmakers stepped up. I'd like to see a little bit more Quentin Johnston as we continue to go on.
Yeah, and honestly, I meant to cool off. I mean, like, if anything, it was like, but if it was like the hot seat was like 97 degrees, I mean, like maybe 1 degree.
It's
like,
96
okay, like I said,
now.
Yeah, like, okay, you did your job.
At least the owner's in a good mood, basically. Hot. Yeah.
He's like, I'm not as upset with you because you did win. So I guess, it's like, yeah. Anyway, but with a couple notes that I had was obviously opening play, by the way. I don't know if you saw like the Darnell Mooney shot. Like, why did Darnell not keep running? Because he was never touched down. And I feel like after that, it was just Bears. That was really it for the Bears offense. They really didn't have much success. Obviously, we mentioned this team still, even going into the season, we're like, okay, this team is still young, got to rebuild. So tough to throw a young rookie in. I'm not going to be too hard on Tyson Bagent. He's obviously was a backup. And like we mentioned, not a lot of talent. Like I said, you mentioned no starting running back. Obviously a couple offensive linemen hurt as always. And it's being thrust into a tough spot. And on the flip side, too, I mentioned lack of talent. We saw that as Justin Herbert was, I think he's complete, like, was it first, 15 passes or something? He was cooking basically the whole game. Extremely efficient, as you saw with his 31 for 40. Against some of the lesser teams, we'll see the Chargers do this. They'll be surgical, and this is not a knock on Herbert. I think it's more a knock on their personnel and their play style, but very good at the short passing game. But we'll see as the season goes on, and maybe Quentin Johnson can unlock that as they integrate him more into the offense. But if he can be that deep threat, then kind of fill that Mike Williams role, because Mike Williams is really their only deep threat. And other than that, it's just Herbert making the damnedest throw, like I mentioned. They don't really have a run game. The run game still didn't really get going this game, but at least you saw Eckler get going, be a crucial part of that passing game, along with, like you mentioned, Quentin Johnson. Keenan Allen's always a staple. So, I mean, I didn't really mention it, but, he's always reliable for them. And yeah, that's all I really had. Because, yeah, like you mentioned, this game is really just about the Chargers handling their business and winning. And that's what they did. So, good job. You get a thumbs up. That's all from us in regards to taking care of business, LA at home. But let's move on to the Monday night game. Last but not least, as it was the Detroit Lions beating the Las Vegas Raiders 26-14. What were your thoughts here, John?
Yeah, this. Let's just cut straight to the chase. Jimmy Garoppolo did not have a great game. All right, the Lions. I mean, I wouldn't say they were the most impressive that I've seen them all season. Jared Goff. I mean, he was solid, but nothing special. Jahmyr Gibbs did really pop. It was nice to see him get like a crazy big workload. I'd love to see him continue to be involved, even when they bring Montgomery back, because just quite frankly, Montgomery with the same kind of huge workloads was far less efficient than Jahmyr Gibbs was, because Gibbs is a lot more explosive. But I digress. The Raiders, Devontae Adams was very upset on the sideline. Josh Jacobs still, I mean, like, he had that one good drive, but really outside of that, like, not a ton of impact. I don't know. Jimmy G can't seem to hit Devontae and Jacoby Myers when they're wide open downfield. Like, Devontae's talking about potentially wanting to get traded apparently a month ago, and the trade deadline comes and he doesn't. It's just, the Raiders are a mess, man. And I feel bad for Devontae because he went there to play with Derek Carr. Now, you can criticize that decision, because personally, I didn't really see, what he saw in the Raiders. Like, I know you're friends with Derek Carr, but that's, if the only thing that you got is your friendship there, like, I just personally wouldn't have.
I'm assuming, sorry to interject, like, also a little bit of West Coast. He is from Fresno State, so maybe like close to home-ish per se too, as opposed to living in, Wisconsin.
Sure.
So that's also an allure. Like, I'd rather go back home near LA.
Yeah, I'm sure he had his reasons, but ultimately, I don't know. At least on the outside looking in, maybe it's because we know Mike and he's a Raiders fan, but it seemed like the Raiders had kind of been souring on Carr anyway. And if Carr being gone is like the one thing that now it's like, like I could tolerate being bad with Carr, but now I can't tolerate without him. I don't know. Like I said, you can criticize his decision, but ultimately, I thought they should have got rid of him. Like, what is your future? Like, Devontae is a win now receiver. It's not like Devontae is a young guy who you can build around for the next 8 years. Like, Devontae he's a veteran. He's been around the league. If you're gonna have him, you should be competing for the playoffs. And if you don't, like, why would you not maximize the potential assets you could get right now? They signed him to a big deal, right? Like, he's got a big contract.
Yeah, that was part of the reason why he left Green Bay, is because also the Raiders were willing to give him the money he wanted.
Yeah, so I mean, maybe that's the financial reasons or why, but just quite frankly, I just feel like the Raiders should kind of tear it down.
The contract does not get. He's making a good chunk of change. So it was a 5-year, $140 million contract initially. This is the second year of that contract. So there's 3 more years after this year. I mean, they could get out after 1 more year, but it would take. Looks like a 15.7 million dead cap at that point.
Yeah. So I don't know. I'm maybe just in a different mindset than where the Raiders feel they are, where I just think they should tear it down, because when you look at the season as a whole, they have not been impressive, to be honest. Like, even in the games they've won, you can't really point to any of those games and be like, wow, like the Raiders really, like, they popped that game. No, it's like they beat the Broncos by 1. They barely beat your Packers. I don't even remember what the third win was, but
Patriots. So that's already says a lot.
Beating the Patriots, man. Like, I don't know. I just feel like it feels like they're fighting a losing battle. So
yeah. I mean, just to add on that, I mean, like we talked about this before recording. I mean, this is what at least you and I and some people that really watch and understand the game knew about Jimmy Garoppolo. Especially that's one of the reasons why San Francisco really let him go, is because he had limitations.
Yeah.
In regards to especially throwing the ball downfield, and especially deep downfield, and we saw that obviously this game, and dealing with pressure, and like it's the reason why we're not as high. We weren't sipping all the Brock Purdy Gatorade and such. It's because it was an all-star team and an amazing team, an amazing play caller in San Francisco. So
yeah.
And like we said, we've seen Nick Mullins do great in that system and such. So granted,
and the logic is just too, like, if what you were capable of in San Francisco was his peak was like 3,500 yards, 27 touchdowns. If that's your peak in that offense, how can I expect you to go to a less talented offense with a play caller you're not as familiar with and a new playbook and all these things and expect you to replicate that? I can't, because if Mahomes was in that Niners offense, he's putting up 50 touchdowns. So, and that's why we were talking about with Brock Purdy, is like, you got a super team around you. So if this is the best we get out of you out of a super team, I don't know if I believe in you outside of this system,
Yeah. And so, yeah, definitely a performance to forget from him. And yeah, like you said, unfortunately, free Devontae, but not looking like he'll be freed, at least for it's week 8, at least for another 9-10 weeks of the regular season, and I doubt they'll make the playoffs. Only other thing I want to mention, I'm heard in my notes, you mentioned Gibbs had a great game. I mean, even Craig Reynolds had a really efficient, good game. I think that just goes to show how great the Lions are, especially in regards to the run defense, the run offense and their offensive line. Like, I feel like I mention every week, but then so good off of that in regards to getting, finding ways off the run game to get Laporta the ball, or creative ways to get him under St. Brown, who's may not be, I would not put him in top 5, but basically in regards to slot receivers and such, he's probably would be top 5, top 3. I don't think I don't have to do a list off the top of my head, but he's getting there. He's amazing for them, and obviously, hopefully, we can get more Jameson Williams as time goes on. Although I do like how they got him not only involved in the pass game. I think it was Cleve Freeman that got lit up, not Jameson Williams, but still.
Jameson got smacked on one too. It was.
Was it a penalty? Because it's not showing on the rushing report on ESPN.
It might have been a penalty. I don't know. I can't remember.
There might have been a penalty on that. Okay, because I would say I thought I saw him get killed by Mason Crosby, because they for some reason ran a jet sweep towards Mason Crosby.
Max Crosby.
Mason.
Yeah.
Oof, not Mason. No, Mason would not kill.
No, yeah,
it's very close.
The Jameson one was like a 6-yard loss or something, but I'm assuming there was maybe a penalty or something that changed it.
Yeah. So, but nonetheless. Yeah, and then, like you mentioned with Goff, like, hey, we're talking about system guys. Goff doing very good. Hey, he's doing great. But we still saw with that pick six, like there's a reason why the Rams got rid of Jared Goff. It's just things like that. Like that pick six was a bad decision. Like I mentioned a couple weeks ago, without routes, you can't be late, especially against a veteran guy like Marcus Peters, who's just sitting, who loves to sit, and wait for that flat throw like that when you're late. And as we saw, pick six. But other than that, like you mentioned, Raiders really didn't do much outside the one drive. They leaned on Josh Jacobs, which even then, surprised it worked that drive. I think they only had like 2 passes that drive. It was like all runs, so I'm surprised they didn't just lean on that more. But who knows? And I'm sure, and I know that there's a lot of criticism around Josh McDaniels, and rightly so, as his first 2 years have not gone very well. Especially with Devontae, like you mentioned, some of the weapon they have with Devontae, some of the other pieces they have. And this is fortunate for the Raiders. But Lions take care of business. They win, like I said, 26-14. And like we mentioned, could very well, because of their weak schedule, could very well end up as having home field advantage at the end of the year. Obviously, we'll wait and see how the year shapes out. But anything else before you wanted to add? Because other than that would wrap up week 8.
That's it. I mean, rather uneventful trade deadline, honestly, outside of the Washington stuff. I was a little bit surprised.
I was a little bit, not really too much, because I saw that Schefter, I think they brought him on right Monday night, and he mentioned that he wasn't hearing much, and some of the other podcast insiders I listened to, they mentioned like not hearing much at the deadline either. So
I just expected like Judy, some of these kind of other guys to get moved, but I guess
I'm
not.
surprised they haven't. Once again, this is one thing with the NFL on top of officiating, which is a whole other thing, that they haven't adjusted. Like maybe move it a week, because like week 8's no longer the halfway point. You have 18 weeks now, so maybe move it to week 9. Like I don't know, like I don't think that one extra week of moving it back like hurts any team specifically. Like I don't know, you know what I mean? I'm sure it would, because there's still like unclear regards to something like you mentioned with the Vikings. Like I'm sure the Vikings would probably, now they'd have a week to negotiate and figure it out, as opposed to what, like 36 hours after Kirk Cousins, towards Achilles, to figure out if they're going to fire, things like that.
Right.
And such. And so same with the Raiders, that's the situation. I'm sure they wish they would have had another week to maybe figure something out and get the deal they wanted for Devontae, as opposed to, like I said, 36, or heck, their game was Monday night. So they had probably 12 hours to sit there and actually negotiate and, figure things out if they wanted to.
Yeah, and another week also just makes teams more sure of where they are. Like, if you're sitting at 3-4 right now, you might be like, "Well, we're still in the hunt," but 3-5, you might feel a little bit differently there. Especially maybe you're 3-5 with a couple of tough games coming up, where you're like, we got to go play Philadelphia or Buffalo or some of these teams, right? So, yeah, I agree. I think they should move back a week, considering the expanded season.
Yeah, like for example, the Bucks, like you mentioned, like a team that we were like, hey, they could sell, but right now 3-4. So I mean, they're like, we're kind of sitting pretty. So maybe if they lose on Sunday next week and trade deadline was 48 hours later, then they might be more inclined to accept calls and make deals. But nonetheless, nothing we can do. We're just two guys, in our rooms making a podcast over this. Unfortunately, not in the NFL front office, but nonetheless, that'll do it for us. We'll be back obviously later in the week to make our week 9 picks against the spread. Spoiler alert, once again, John beat me in overall record, and as I mentioned with the damn Cardinals, I also lost money-wise, even though I think if I won that one, it wouldn't have mattered. But at least I think would have gone positive in terms of money. You went positive in terms of money. I unfortunately did not. I still owe money.
I mean, I went positive by 20 or something? It was close.
It was no, because I factored in the Detroit game. It was before Detroit. So now you're plus, at least for this week, you're 220.
Oh,
plus 220.
Okay. Nice.
But before the Detroit game, you're plus 20. And Detroit obviously won. You put 200 on them, so you got plus 220. Nice. The Detroit game did save me, at least. I went from being minus, I think, 700 to now minus 500 or 400 and change. Oof. So better than last week, I guess. That's all I can say. But nonetheless, like I said, that'll do it for us. We'll see you all later.